The biting wind of late autumn whipped across the sprawling manicured lawns of Evergreen Cemetery, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the profound silence of eternal rest. At the center of a mausoleum, carved from imported Italian marble, stood Mr. David Miller, a man whose name was synonymous with New York real estate and whose life had been fractured 8 months prior. David, a man of 65 years, whose gray hair was meticulously styled and whose bespoke charcoal suit bespoke immense wealth, looked utterly ravaged by grief. He wasn't crying with sound, but with an agonizing internal shudder, his shoulders trembling beneath the fine wool. He stood before a monument etched with the names Donna Taylor, age 4, and Brenda Walker, age 4. They were his only grandchildren, the twin daughters of his beloved son, William Jones. And they had supposedly perished in a sudden, tragic fire at William's country estate up north. The official report was clear, the funerals were public, yet David felt no peace. He visited this empty crypt every Tuesday, pouring his sorrow into the cold stone, driven by a nagging, unsettling the same feeling of hollowness that had plagued him since the day the remains were interred. There was no closure here, only a suffocating sense of wrongness. David carried with him a small, worn photograph, its edges softened by months of handling. It showed 2 radiant little girls, one with a mischievous gap-toothed grin, Donna, the other with solemn, thoughtful eyes, Brenda, both dressed in matching pale blue dresses. The sheer vitality captured in the image stood in stark contrast to the sterile finality of the mausoleum. He ran a trembling finger over Brenda's face, muttering a prayer into the silence. "My girls," he whispered, the sound catching in his throat like sandpaper. The tragedy had not just taken the twins. It had utterly broken William, who was now a shadow of his former self, consumed by guilt and unable to handle the business David had built. The old man was left to manage a vast empire while battling the consuming grief of a grandfather who had buried his legacy before its time. The company, Miller Holdings, was now vulnerable, suffering from a recent dip in its stock value, a fact that exacerbated David's anxiety. As David stood there, lost in his private torture, a figure emerged from the dense growth of cypress trees lining the cemetery's older section. It was a young man, perhaps 27 years old, dressed in the heavy, practical uniform of the New York City Fire Department. This was Gregory Roberts, a third-generation firefighter from the outer boroughs. Gregory wasn't here officially. He had a relative buried nearby and often came to sit quietly, seeking respite from the daily grind of sirens and emergencies. He noticed David immediately. The millionaire was a recognizable, if aloof, figure in the city. Gregory watched as the older man sank onto a stone bench, resting his head in his hands. He was about to turn away, respecting the man's profound privacy, when David let out a deep, wrenching sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the city itself. Gregory, whose life was defined by responding to distress, felt compelled to approach, even though he knew he shouldn't intrude on such obvious, raw grief. Gregory walked slowly toward the mausoleum, his heavy boots crunching softly on the gravel path. "Mr. he asked, his voice low and respectful. David flinched, pulling his hands away quickly, his face a mask of exhausted dignity. "I apologize, sir," Gregory continued, holding up his hand in a gesture of peace. "I'm Gregory Roberts. I just wanted to offer my deepest condolences." David merely nodded, his eyes cloudy. He asked, his voice rough. Gregory shook his head. "No, sir, I was on rotation in a different precinct, but I heard the details. A tough loss." There was a beat of silence, broken only by the mournful call of a distant foghorn. David looked directly at the young firefighter, the first time he had truly seen him. There was an open honesty in Gregory's eyes that was unusual in the circles David inhabited. "Thank you, Roberts," David said, adjusting his silk tie. "But condolences don't fill the space." He turned back to the marble plaque, his gaze fixed on the names. "The worst part is the lack of peace. I don't feel them here. I just don't." Gregory took a deep breath, shifting his weight. He hesitated, considering the magnitude of the statement he was about to make, aware of how utterly insane it would sound. He had been struggling with this secret for nearly 4 months, a heavy burden carried since a particularly disturbing night shift. "Mr. Miller," Gregory said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "With all respect, David Miller froze completely. He turned, his usually astute eyes narrowed to slits of cold fury mixed with disbelief. "Excuse me, firefighter? That is an abominable thing to say." The remains were positively identified. The investigation was closed. Gregory held his ground, his face earnest. "I'm suggesting something much darker, sir. Something I saw with my own eyes, but could never report because I would have been institutionalized." He took another step closer, lowering his head. "I didn't find them at the fire, Mr. Miller. I found them, ... Double quotes, the revelation landed like a physical blow. David stumbled back, gripping the edge of the stone bench for support. "The dump, the garbage facility," he hissed, his voice trembling with a terrifying blend of hope and revulsion. "Explain yourself." "Boy," Gregory glanced around the deserted cemetery, his urgency matching David's terror. 4 months ago, I was off duty, driving home around 3 in the morning, near the sanitation complex. There was a disturbance, a smoldering fire at the edge of the primary dumping area. I stopped instinctively." He paused, his memory reliving the horrifying scene. "I got out. The fire was small, localized, but as I stamped it out, I heard this faint, wretched whimpering. Hidden beneath a pile of industrial plastic and smoldering refuse, I found 2 infants, 2 little girls." Gregory's eyes were shadowed with the trauma of the memory. They were barely conscious. Their wrists still had hospital identification bands. He watched the color drain completely from the millionaire's face. I recognized the name from the news. The fire, the tragedy, was all over the city. I knew instantly that this was wrong. This was planned. David Miller felt his sophisticated world crumble around him, replaced by the sickening reality of trash and abandonment. His mind raced, connecting the dots, the quick funeral, his son's catatonic grief, the unsettling sense of a rushed... "Why, Gregory? Why didn't you go to the police?" Gregory looked down, shame etched on his face. "When I saw them, Mr. Miller, they were sickly, but they were breathing. I knew that whoever did this, the people who faked their death and left them in a literal dump, were highly resourceful and protected. Going through official channels, especially with a name as powerful as Miller, felt impossible. I was afraid they would vanish them permanently if the wrong person found out they were still alive. I took them." He locked eyes with David. The sheer audacity, the unbelievable risk this young firefighter had taken, momentarily stunned the millionaire into silence. The grief was now replaced by a burning, incandescent fury, fueled by a nascent, terrifying hope. The frigid air around David Miller seemed to solidify, trapping the words between the 2 men. The shock of Gregory's confession, the absolute, horrifying, yet exhilarating possibility that his grandchildren were alive, had stripped the millionaire of his polished demeanor. David repeated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "For 4 months, you, an unknown man, have been hiding my family." Gregory stood tall, unflinching. "I understand everything, Mr. Miller. I understand that the official report said their bodies were charred beyond recognition. Yet the official medical examiner was a contract worker, not their regular pediatrician. I understand that when I held them that night, they were frail and smelling of smoke and refuse, but they were breathing." David realized he was looking at an accidental hero, a man who possessed a moral courage his own wealthy circles had long forgotten. "Take me to them," he commanded, his desperation now an unconcealed urgency. Now, Gregory agreed instantly, but warned him of the precautions. "I haven't told a soul. I had to create a fortress of silence. You can't arrive in your usual chauffeured sedan. We drive my truck, and you follow my instructions to the letter. Whoever orchestrated this cover-up, and I suspect it's someone very close to your son. Sir, given the speed of the supposed cremation, they are still watching the journey from the opulence of the cemetery district to the gritty edges of the industrial zone felt like crossing a continental divide." David, hunched in the passenger seat of Gregory's aged, mud-splattered utility vehicle, watched the city blur past. The pristine glass towers of Manhattan receded, replaced by chain-link fences, rusting warehouses, and the pervasive odor of diesel and manufacturing waste. Gregory had secured a small, virtually abandoned auxiliary storage facility miles from the nearest residential area. It was insulated, had minimal utility access, and, most importantly, was invisible. He had leveraged his professional knowledge, setting up a bare-bones existence, a couple of camp cots, a small, safe electric heater, and a refrigerator he kept stocked through clandestine supply runs at varying times of night. As they drove, Gregory filled in the blanks. They were terrified at first. cried constantly. They didn't speak in full sentences, just whimpered words like mommy and fire. I had to use my own savings and vacation days to stay with them. I taught them trust through repetition, Mr. Miller. I never raised my voice. I gave them only bland, safe food. I had to remove their fear of adult men, which was intense. They are just now starting to play quietly. David listened, his face hardening with a terrible realization. His son, William, was incapacitated by grief. Yet the villain in this tragedy was almost certainly Karen Gonzalez, William's estranged wife, and David's daughter. Karen, whose debts had been mounting, whose lavish lifestyle was unsustainable, and who stood to inherit a significant protective trust if the children were no longer in the line of succession. She had the motive, the ruthlessness, and the access to the estate. They pulled up to the secured lot behind a fortress of discarded shipping containers. Gregory killed the engine. We walked the rest of the way, he instructed. We approached slowly. If they see a strange man move quickly, they will shut down. They won't recognize you. David nodded, absorbing the painful truth. He was a stranger, a sudden ghost from a previous life. They entered the cool, echoing warehouse through a rear service door, secured by a complex lock only Gregory knew. The air inside was still and clean, free of the dump's pollution, but smelled faintly of antiseptic wipes and children's talcum powder, heartbreaking domestic scent in a cold industrial shell. In the farthest corner, separated by heavy canvas tarps, was the children's makeshift haven. Gregory pushed aside the canvas gently. David's breath caught in his throat. They're sitting cross-legged on a faded quilt, illuminated by a single, carefully positioned electric lamp, were Donna and Brenda. They looked small, almost fragile, but their large brown eyes were alert and bright. They were clean, dressed in slightly mismatched but warm clothing. Donna was attempting to stack colorful plastic blocks, while Brenda was quietly stroking a threadbare stuffed tiger. They were alive. They were Heiau. They were miracles concealed by injustice. Brenda was the first to notice them. She stopped stroking the toy and turned her head slowly, her eyes fixing on David, who was standing motionless in the shadow of the tarp. Her face, still round and innocent, crumpled in a flash of instinctive terror. She didn't scream, but her whole body convulsed, and she instantly scrambled to hide behind Donna, burying her face in the other twin's shoulder. Donna, the bolder one, gripped her sister fiercely and turned her wide, frightened eyes on David. Gregory stepped forward, speaking in the quiet, calming tone David had noticed earlier. "It's okay, girls. It's just Gregory, and this is a friend." The girls didn't relax. They merely clung tighter to each other, their attention focused entirely on David's imposing, unfamiliar silhouette. The sight was like an arrow piercing the millionaire's heart. He was their grandfather, the man who used to fly them kites on his private beach, the man who had bought them their first ponies. Now, he was just another frightening adult. The emotional force of the moment was so overwhelming that David, who had commanded boardrooms and dictated fortunes, found himself utterly reduced. He sank slowly to his knees, heedless of the concrete floor, his hands resting palms up on his thighs in a gesture of absolute surrender and non-aggression. He tried to speak, but the words were thick with unshed tears. He could only manage a ragged whisper. Donna ... Brenda ... Goats Donna, hearing his voice, paused. She tilted her head, a sliver of curiosity overriding her panic. It wasn't recognition, but perhaps a buried resonance, a sound from the deep past. David saw the faint scarring on Donna's elbow, a tiny reminder of the tumble she had taken months before the fire. That small, imperfect detail confirmed everything. His grief had been misplaced, his mourning manufactured, the fury at Karen, and whoever she had partnered with, intensified tenfold. They had not just faked a death. They had sentenced two innocent children to an existence of fear and abandonment, all for money. David stayed there for nearly 10 minutes, kneeling silently, allowing his presence to become static, non-threatening. Gregory whispered to him, "They need time. They only feel safe when they're alone with me or when they're together." David understood he couldn't yank them out of this life, no matter how desperately he wanted to hold them. He had to dismantle the fear, piece by painful piece. He looked at Gregory, the young firefighter who had risked his career, his freedom, and his sanity for 2 children. He didn't even know. David's business acumen kicked in, replacing the raw emotion with cold, calculating determination. The first priority was extraction, the second was justice, and the third was securing Gregory's future. He had stumbled upon a loyalty more valuable than any asset on Wall Street. He had to ensure that the man who saved his granddaughters would never have to worry about the cost of that heroism. He slowly Jose, backing out of the visible space before speaking to Greggy outside the canvas screen. "We move them tonight," David stated, his voice now low and still. "They go to a secure, private location immediately, a place outside the country. A safe house retreat in Switzerland. I own it. It's impenetrable and staffed by people who have signed lifelong non-disclosure agreements. You, Gregory, are coming with them. You are their anchor. They won't go anywhere without you. And from this moment, you are under my protection. We are now partners in this investigation." David G. Miller, the grieving grandfather, had been replaced by the ruthless CEO, now motivated by a deeply personal, terrifying thirst for retribution. The game was no longer about assets. It was about saving the assets that truly mattered. The strategy developed by David and Gregory was swift, precise, and executed with the chilling efficiency of a military operation. Using his connections to the City Industrial Utilities and Gregory's intimate knowledge of emergency protocols, David manufactured a controlled emergency situation involving a chemical spill near the storage facility. This created a legitimate perimeter, diverting all casual surveillance and traffic for a 12-hour window. Under the guise of a fire department hazardous materials containment team, Gregory, disguised and accompanied by David's head of security, was able to extract Donna and Brenda unnoticed. They made the transfer to a private jet waiting at a small regional airport 75 miles upstate, ensuring they were untraceable. Within 24 hours, the twins and Gregory were safely ensconced in the secured Alpine retreat, surrounded by a dedicated team of discreet caregivers and medical professionals, ready to begin their slow, psychological recovery. With the girls secure, David returned to the city, his focus shifting entirely to retribution. He initiated a deep forensic audit of Karen's finances, $5 million made over a 2-month period immediately following the supposed fire. The recipient was a shell corporation registered in a Caribbean nation, but the beneficiary signature traced back to Thomas the Collector Rodriguez, a disgraced former security chief from one of Miller Holdings' rival firms, known for his ability to organize silent, untraceable operations. Rodriguez had the muscle and the networks. Karen had the motive and the access. The transaction records confirmed the conspiracy was planned weeks before the actual fire. David set the trap. He scheduled an emergency board meeting, citing a major financial restructuring needed due to the prolonged slump in company stock. A slump Karen had secretly hoped would lead to her financial takeover. He used the meeting's confidential nature to lure Karen to a private, unused corporate yacht moored at a desolate pier near the old Navy Yard. The location was remote, easily secured, and equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance and recording equipment. When Karen arrived, looking sleek and predatory in a blood-red silk suit, she found only David and a heavy-armed, silent Gregory Roberts standing like a guardian at the door. She demanded, her voice impatient. David stood before her, his hands clasped behind his back, his face devoid of emotion. "There is no board meeting, Karen." He held up the photograph of Donna and Brenda, the one from the cemetery. Karen's carefully constructed composure shattered. She paled dramatically, stumbling back a step. "I don't know what you're talking about. Those children died tragically in the fire." Her denial was immediate but unconvincing. David merely held up a tablet, displaying the irrefutable bank transfer records and the identity of Thomas Rodriguez. "The money trail is clean, Karen. The motive is clear." Greed backed into a corner, and realizing the depth of David's evidence, Karen's fear curdled into poisonous rage. She laughed, a brittle, horrifying sound. "They were accidents, David. Obstacles. They stood between me and true financial freedom. Your son, William, was useless, a weak shadow. I deserved this company." She spat the word parasites with genuine venom, confirming the deep, pathological hatred that had driven her to such an unspeakable act. The confession was captured entirely on the yacht's hidden audio-video feeds, a clean, airtight recording of the conspiracy. David asked, his voice shaking with restrained violence. "The fire was Rodriguez's insurance policy," Karen sneered. "A distraction. We just needed the appearance of death. They were sedated, wrapped up, and dropped. I was supposed to be a grieving mother, but I never cared." At that moment, The cabin door opened, and a squad of specialized detectives from the state police walked in, led by a stern captain David had contacted hours before. The yacht was secured. Karen, screaming obscenities and fighting desperately, was taken into custody. Moments later, a secondary unit apprehended Thomas Rodriguez at a cheap motel outside the city. Justice, though agonizingly delayed, was finally served. In the ensuing weeks, the truth was quietly leaked to the press as a complicated insurance fraud scheme protecting the children's names and location. William Jones, shattered by the revelation of his wife's monstrous betrayal, finally began to emerge from his shell of grief. David flew him to the Swiss safe house. The reunion between William and his daughters, Donna and Brenda, was slow, hesitant, but profound. They didn't remember their father, but they recognized the sadness in his eyes and the quiet desperation of his love. With Gregory's patient guidance, the healing began in earnest. The children, secure and loved, started to thrive, their voices filling the Alpine chalet with the sound of laughter that David had thought lost forever. The central lesson was not about the power of wealth, but the power of conscience. David Miller knew he owed an unpayable debt. He didn't offer Gregory Riley a large check or a medal. He offered him a place at the center of their new family. Gregory, the firefighter whose only motive was decency, was formally adopted by David, legally recognized as a crucial member of the Miller family. He was given a seat on the board of Miller Philanthropies, tasked with overseeing a new $150 million fund dedicated to providing emergency services and secure housing for vulnerable children. David had his family back, and in doing so, he had acquired the most valuable asset of all, a moral compass in the form of a young, unconventional hero. The twins now ran fearlessly toward David, calling him Grandpa, but they reserved their deepest, most trusting love for their Uncle Gregory, the man who had pulled them from the dust and ash of the city's refuse and delivered them to a second chance at life. The sound of their footsteps was the only legacy David Miller would ever truly need. We have reached the end of this journey, a testament to the unexpected heroism found in the darkest places. If this story of perseverance, justice, and new beginnings moved you, we'd love to have you join our community. Click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. That's completely free and ensures you won't miss any of our future heartfelt narratives. Tell us, which city are you watching this story from? Share your location in the comments. And finally, did you enjoy this adaptation? What is the most important lesson you learned from the resilience of Donna and Brenda and the bravery of Gregory Roberts? We read every comment,